The heat is on. It's on the street. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to my channel. The heat is on for sure outside, but it's also from this movie we're going to talk about. And the movie we're talking about, and if I look a little wet, my son and I just got out of the pool, so I'm still a little wet from the pool. But the movie we're going to talk about today is Beverly Hills Cop. This movie was released December of 1984. And this film kind of had a funky development. Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer were just coming off of Flashdance, and this was a script that had been kicking around for a little while, and they wanted to make it with Sylvester Stallone originally. Now Sylvester Stallone came in, rewrote the script, turned it more into a straight up action picture instead of an action comedy, which is what Bruckheimer and Simpson wanted to make. But it was deemed too expensive. They said it was a good script, just too expensive, so Sylvester Stallone backed out of the project because he couldn't see himself playing the fish out of the water like Eddie Murphy does in this film. So he left the project, and actually a lot of the ideas he wrote for Beverly Hills Cop, he took and made a little movie called Cobra, which was made about 2 or 3 years later, which I love Cobra. I did a review for that back in the fall. You can scroll on down through my page, you'll find it. So Sylvester Stallone was out. Now, this is when they were looking at Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy was just coming off of 48 Hours, which was a hit with Nick Nolte, and a hit that was comedy that was Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd. So he signed on to play Axel Foley. They brought in Judge Reinhold to play Detective Billy Rosewood, John Ashton to play Sergeant Taggart. We got the great Ronnie Cox again. I've been talking about Ronnie Cox a lot lately. He plays Lieutenant Bogomil of the Beverly Hills Police Department, and we got Steve Burkhoff in this film as Victor Maitland, our bad guy. And although Stephen Burkhoff does not like this film, which is kind of funny. But who he brought in to direct this film was Martin Brest. Martin Brest had directed a few films, and he was set to do War Games, but he got kicked off of that movie. And he was considered damaged goods at the time, but Bruckheimer and Simpson they had enough faith in him, so they brought him in to direct a film. And he does a really nice job, and after this film he went on to do Midnight Run, which you've never seen Midnight Run. Do yourself a favor and check that movie out. That movie is awesome. So anyway, we open up in Detroit, Michigan, and we see these guys in an alley talking to Eddie Murphy, and Eddie Murphy is trying to sell him a truck full of cigarettes. And the cops show up, and one guy gets in the cab of the truck and takes off with Eddie Murphy in the back, and we have our first car chase through the city of Detroit. And the guy gets caught, and the cops are on the truck, and they realize it's Detective Axel Foley, and they all start, he goes back to the station, they all start giving him shit. And his Inspector Todd comes in and starts the typical captain role, and especially in these kind of films where they're hard asses and they give the main hero a lot of shit, and he does give him a lot of shit. And the guy who played Inspector Todd, his real name is Gilbert Hill. He was actually a real-life homicide detective in Detroit, and they brought him in to play Inspector Todd in this film. I thought that was that's pretty cool they did that, and he was in the second film, and he was in the third film, which we'll get into. I'm going to do 2 and 3. We're going to do all 3 of them right in a row. He is told to go home, and he does, and when he gets home, his buddy shows up. He was away for a while. He was in prison. He got out, and he went to California, and he was working security, and he shows Axel these Varabons that he has taken from this warehouse, and they go out and they have a couple drinks, they're playing pool, they go back to Eddie Murphy's house, and these guys show up, knock Axel out, and kill his friend. Now obviously Axel takes this personal, and him and his friend have been friends since they were kids, and he decides to take vacation and head to Beverly Hills to see if he can track down and see what happened, who may have wanted to have his friend killed. And this is where we're introduced to Victor Maitland. He runs these art galleries. He's supposed to be a big-time art dealer, but Axel already knows something's up. And after the first run-in with him, he gets arrested by the Beverly Hills Police Department, and this is when we're introduced to Lieutenant Taggart, Judge Reinhold's character, Billy Rosewood, and Lieutenant Bogomil. And they realize he's a cop, and they're asking what he's doing in Beverly Hills, and he tells them I'm just on vacation. They've already talked to Inspector Todd, so they know he might be out there snooping around on this case of his friend who got murdered. And basically after that, he sends Taggart and Rosewood to follow Axel. Axel messes with them, but eventually they become friendly. He takes him out to a strip club, and him and Taggart stop a robbery because Axel sees these 2 guys come in to look fishy. He tells Taggart to take a position by the one gentleman, and he basically goes up to the other guy acting all drunk, and they end up taking those guys out before they can rob the joint. And right then and there, when they go back to the station, he comes up with this super cop story about Rosewood and Taggart to kind of cover with him, because the cops in Beverly Hills are very buttoned up. They do things by the book, and Axel's not used to doing things that way. So he comes up with this story to cover their asses because they're at a strip club. And this is when Bogomil, you can tell, starts to like Axel. He's smiling as he's telling him the story. He knows his bullshit, but he kind of likes this guy. And basically, his friend that lives in L.A., this woman who he also grew up with, lets him into Victor Maitland's warehouse, and they find drugs. I'm skipping over some things, but we got to get through this review. And then they get found by Victor Maitland and his goons. They're going to kill Axel. They take the girl as a hostage, but Rosewood was there, and he comes in and saves Axel's life. And they go to this big mansion in Beverly Hills to get the girl back and stop Maitland. And at the end of the film, Maitland ends up getting shot and killed by Bogomil and Axel helps save the day. And at the end of the film, they all end up being nice, good friends at the end of the film. And in the sequel, they're friends right at the beginning of the movie. They pick up in the sequel, which I'm going to do tomorrow, that they establish that they've been friends since he left Beverly Hills the first time. And we'll get into that more. And at the end of the film, they win. And that's Beverly Hills Cop, pretty much. This movie was a huge hit back then. It had a $14 million budget. When it came out that December, it made $234 in the U.S. and $316 worldwide. This was a huge hit. And actually, the executives at Paramount, when they screened it for the executives, and once they got done watching it, they already greenlit the sequel, although the sequel didn't come out for 2 or 3 years later. And they had a different director by that point. Tony Scott came in and directed the sequel. But this was a huge hit, and this was like 3 hits in a row for Eddie Murphy, because 48 Hours was a huge hit, Trading Places was a huge hit, but this was his biggest hit. And actually, this was his first #1 movie, and he had 7 in a row, but this was the start of it. He had 7 movies in a row that debuted at #1, so that's pretty cool. What would I rate Beverly Hills Cop? This is obviously a classic action comedy film, buddy cop film. Eddie Murphy's great in the film as the fish out of the water, and all the supporting cast is awesome. This movie is stacked from top to bottom with great character actors, and they all do really well. And Martin Brest does a great job keeping the pace moving. He shoots the action when it does happen. There's not a whole lot of action in this film, and there's some in the beginning, a little bit in the middle, and then at the end, the final shootout. The sequel definitely has a lot more action, especially when you have Tony Scott. They up the action in the sequel. This one doesn't have as much. It's more about the hijinks and him being a fish out of water, finding his legs in Beverly Hills, and finding who killed his friend. But this movie's really well done, and Eddie Murphy's so engaging that you just go along for the ride. Even when there's some slower parts, it all just clicks. I would give Beverly Hills Cop a 9 out of 10. It's a classic film. I've loved this film since I was a kid. I've watched it many times over the years. I watched it again last night. It still holds up extremely well. And this is Eddie Murphy at the peak of his powers in the 80s. I mean, he was coming off, like I said, 48 Hours, Trading Places, which is a great comedy. And then he went on to do other great comedies, sequel to this. He did Coming to America, The Golden Child. Eddie Murphy was on a roll in the 80s. He was one of our biggest stars at the time. And I know they're talking about doing a 4th Beverly Hills Cop. We'll talk about that when we get on to the 3rd one. But yeah, 9 out of 10 for Beverly Hills Cop. What are your thoughts on this film? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. Hit the thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button. Share this video. I greatly appreciate it. Y'all take care of each other. And I'll be back with Beverly Hills Cops 2 very soon. See you later. Bye.